In this tutorial, we'll work through the node flow for doing final pixel green screen compositing and keying with the node group that AutoShot creates inside Blender. First of all, let's switch to the Compositing tab. And we're going to hover over the upper panel and hit Shift F10. Make sure you're toggled into the image editor. And then you can click on this pull down and just make sure you're showing a viewer node. You can hover over the bottom panel and toggle through Shift F3 to make sure you're on the Compositor nodes, and make sure the Node Wrangler is enabled. So edit preferences add-on and just type in NODE. We can see that Node Wrangler is enabled. Node Wrangler lets us connect a viewer node to any highlighted node with Control Shift and left mouse button. I'm going to hold down Control and Shift, click on the Render Layers node, and we can see our viewer node, which is now connected to this display up here. And if your viewer is blank, you'll need to render a single frame with F12. I already rendered a single frame, so you can see the frame in the render layers. Now select the AutoShot node group, and we can either press Tab to dive in, or sometimes it's easier to have everything at the top level. So I can right click and do ungroup and zoom back out. And I'm going to grab my render layer nodes, click on it, hit G for grab, move it back over, and everything's back where it should be. And we can scale our viewer node display up a little bit. Zoom in a bit. Now you can see numerical values of the rendered composite by holding down Shift and right-clicking on the image. So hold down Shift and I'll right-click on the image, and underneath it you can see the X, Y, and Y values of where you are with the cursor, as well as the R, G, and B values of the actual rendered composite. Let's walk through the composite. Highlight the Camera Original node and click Control Shift left mouse button to connect the viewer node. And again, here's the viewer node, and we've just connected it to our Camera Original. And you can keep Control Shift left mouse button clicking the node, and the viewer will just walk through the different layers of the node. Now, this is a Camera Original, so there is no alpha or depth data in that. But if we scroll down to our render layers, we can see that we can walk through the different pieces of the image, including mist, shadow catcher, noise image, all the different layers that are there in the image to look at. So we'll go back up to our Camera Original. We can move down to our pick green background color here. Blue would work the same way. And we can click the green bar and then the eyedropper, and then we can pick an area in our composite to use for our green reference color for keying. And now we come up here to our keyer nodes. And there's a live keyer node, which is used for the viewport compositor. And we're going to be focusing on the post keyer nodes, which are used for post compositing. So we can follow the line from our Camera Original into our Screen Fix Post node that has a Screen Compensation node group. We're going to Control Shift left mouse button on that. And we can see that that has removed all the variations from our green screen. And that can be very, very useful for many, many cases. And we'll go into more detail on the node group inside that is doing the green screen leveling magic in a future tutorial. Compensation isn't a magic button for every green screen shot. So if it doesn't help you, you can highlight the node and hit M to mute it. And then you'll go back to your original. And we'll click M to unmute. Now let's highlight the keying node and look at its output. Control Shift left mouse button. And all right, we're getting a reasonable key. We have some artifacts, probably due to the H.265 compression, but we'll see how that looks in the comp. And of course, the stage is still showing up. We'll show how to wire in our 3D garbage mat in a future tutorial to remove the stage. Now we'll scroll back out. We're going to look at the keyer live connection. Now, if we Control Shift left mouse button here, wait a second, all of a sudden our keyer looks bad. Okay, what is going on here is that this is a switch that lets us toggle between our post keyer node group and our live keyer node group. And the live keyer is what we currently use for the viewport compositor because it doesn't support this keying node and the nodes in here. Right now we have it switched to our live keyer nodes, which we don't want because we're in the 2D compositor. We're going to turn off the switch, and oh, there we go. Our keyer is back working. Now, one thing to be aware of is if we go back to layout, wait a second, now our viewport is green. And that's because we are using a set of nodes here in our post keyer that are not supported by the real-time viewport compositor. So if you go back to layout, just click this keyer live switch on again. So let's go back to compositing and turn it back off. Now we'll move on to our familiar scale node. Each time I'm just hitting Control Shift left mouse button to move our viewer node forward. There we go. And instead of scaling it to the 3D viewport resolution, in this case, it's scaling to our render output resolution. So our render output resolution is over here, and it's 3840 by 2160, but we're only rendering at a 50% scale. So if we hold down Control and right mouse button and go up to the upper right of our image, we can see that our X and Y is almost 1920 by 1080, and that is a standard HD render. Next, we look at the zoom factor, and it's not being used in this particular composite because it's the full native resolution of the iPhone. JetSet simulates different camera focal lengths by cropping in on the live action image while you're using the iPhone or iPad. And this node performs the same cropping operation on the recorded camera image so that it matches in the composite what you saw while you were shooting. And note that the full camera image is captured and processed, so the cropping is reversible. And finally over to the alpha over node. And for the first time, this is where we see our image finally come together. You can render the scene right now, and the foreground objects will all track with the camera motion. In the 2D compositor, you can move back and forth in the timeline with the right arrow and the left arrow. So you can move forward, and you'll see that the live action is updating, but the CG background is not updating. And that's because the rendered layers do not update when you move it back and forth unless you've already rendered it. So that's why I'm really looking forward to getting all the keyer nodes in the viewport compositor, as well as Eevee Next working, because that's going to be simply amazing. You'll have a real-time, very accurate rendering and compositing experience, all working in the viewport. So we'll keep an eye on that. There's another node in the chain, put this over here, called Use Crytomatte, and we'll look at that later. Crytomatte is really useful when you're putting 3D objects in front of the live action image. The switch is off for now, so we're not using this chain of data coming in from Crytomatte. All right, and that pretty much wraps it up for this keying and compositing group. And next we'll look at the special screen compensation node group that we use to level out the green screen.